Hello everyone. Welcome and thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Sarah Avery and I am the Executive Director of Quanta Change. And my title for today is How Taking Everything Personally Can Actually Help You. You know where this comes from, right? So there's all this advice out there about how you should just stop taking things personally. Yeah, you've heard this, right? So people will say things like, how people treat you is a statement or reflection about them, not about you. Or people cope with their anxieties and fears and insecurities by projecting them onto you. But that's about their stuff, not about yours. So, people, coaches, teachers, therapists are saying this with the very best of intention. And that's so you will stop feeling so bad in reaction to something that someone else said or did. So, has this helped you in some way? Maybe you know that it's really not so much about you anymore, not all about you, it's really about their stuff. Or maybe you recognize now that that they're not intentionally trying to hurt you in some way, and it helps to remind yourself of that. So if so, that is great. And I totally agree that people act out of their own learned distress. I'll explain what that is in a moment. And that if it's rare for people to really intentionally set out to hurt you, and if they do, it's absolutely coming out of their own negativity, and they may even need to be held accountable for that. So if knowing it's their stuff is helpful to you, then that's fantastic. But has repeating to yourself, I'm just not going to take things personally anymore, has that helped change your initial reaction to someone else's poor behavior? Or do you feel a wave of hurt or anger come up every time this happens? Every time someone says or does something in particular, do you feel this wave of negative feeling? Maybe certain behaviors are even trauma triggers for you. Yeah, I really get that. So does that big icky feeling go away instantly when you say, oh, right, I'm not taking things personally anymore? Or does it stick with you for a while? Maybe even for a long time? Do you find that it affects your appetite or your digestion or your sleep or some other really important aspect of your life? Yeah, it really sucks to be derailed by other people's behavior, right? Yeah. So what's going on here? Why is it that even when you rationally know that someone else's bad behavior has nothing to do with you, that it still riles you up so much? Well, it's because it's triggering your learned distress when that happens. So learned distress is the quanta change term for the feeling that you absorbed very early in life that there's something wrong with you being just the way that you are. And there are different kinds of sort of pieces or kinds of learned distress that are pretty typically triggered by other people's behavior, like I don't matter, I'm not good enough, I need people's approval, or I need people to like me, or I need to please them in some way, or I need to be perfect, or I need things to be a certain way in order for me to feel okay. Does that ring a bell? Or are you thinking of other feelings that really typically pop up in reaction to other people that you see popping up as a pattern? Yeah, so the reason that telling yourself, I'm just going to stop taking things personally, doesn't actually work to change your underlying feeling is because learned distress is stored in your sense of self, and your sense of self is not accessible to rational level change. So in other words, you cannot think your way out of your learned distress. So why would I say that it's good then to take everything personally? Is it because I just want you to be a ball of anxiety all the time? No, definitely not. It's because starting to recognize the pattern of learned distress that's triggered by other people's behavior is the first step in unlearning it. It's the first step in actually peeling off layers of learned distress permanently so that it's not there to be triggered anymore. Does that sound good? So what if that ugly feeling that you're so used to popping up every time someone does or says some particular thing, what if that quieted down a lot? Maybe quieted down to a whisper, sort of a shoulder shrug, instead of it being a volcano? Or what if it were even less than that? What if it were almost not there at all? Yeah, it really is good when that happens. And this is what Quanta Change does. This is the kind of result that I've experienced for myself. It's the kind of thing that my clients have been telling me they've experienced for more than 20 years now. So are you wondering what that looks like? Is Quanta Change just some new way that you haven't heard of yet to control your negative feelings, to control your behavior? No, definitely not. So remember how I said that you can't think your way out of your learned distress? So Quanta Change was developed specifically to address that problem. And it does that by working with your brain during sleep. That's for two reasons. First, sleep is when your sense of self is getting recharged. And second, it's when the wall of resistance to change that surrounds your sense of self is deactivated. So what Quanta Change does is it allows you to tell your brain while you're asleep that you want to recharge with your natural well-being, the feeling at your core that you are just great, just being yourself, instead of recharging with learned distress. When you start to do that, through this process, your brain actually peels off layers of learned distress permanently. That core well-being at your center expands to take the place that the learned distress was sitting. You feel better, your life works better, and there's less learned distress there to be triggered all the time in the way that you've experienced. So let me give you a couple of examples of what that's like when that happens. So the first example is around the most prevalent of the learned distress that we all feel and gets triggered in response to other people, the feeling that we don't matter. You might experience this as the feeling that you're not seen or heard, that you're invisible, that you just don't get to be yourself, maybe. There are lots of different facets to I don't matter. So this client, in my example, she had a long-standing beef with her husband, which was that when they had agreed upon leisure time together, if he pulled up his phone and ended up doing a little work email on his phone, or his laptop maybe, that was just a cause for so much upset for my client. And they'd had many, many discussions about this over the years, or maybe even fights. So this is even if she happened to pick up a book or go off and do something else. If he was picking up work activity during that leisure time, even if she were doing something else, it was a cause for tremendous upset and hurt for her. So does this ring a bell? Is there something that someone close to you does repeatedly that really is a huge upset trigger for you, that no matter what you say or do, they're still doing it, and it's just a cause for incredible upset? Yeah, it's awful, I know. So my client here, she'd unlearned lots of layers of learned distress, and they went on this vacation, and on the way up to their vacation, they were driving up to this cabin, and he happened to mention that he might need to take a couple of work calls during this vacation. She lost it. She was really, really upset. Now, this was actually part of her Quanta Change cycle. This is a repeating cycle of change that happens in this process. And what happens is we actually feel a layer of learned distress pretty intensely as it's moving out. So that's really what was happening for her here. So then they got to the cabin and they were having a great time. A couple or 3 days in, she said, "Hey, you know what? I think I'm going to go to the lake this afternoon and take a walk. Do you want to come with me?" And he said, I think I want to stay here. So he stayed at the cabin. She went for her walk around the lake and she was walking and she was thinking, "Hey, now wait a second. I wonder if he's on a work call." Are you thinking that too? Yeah. And then she said it was really different because normally she would start to obsess about that. She would be really enraged about it, even the thought of it. And she said, she thought, well, you know what? I'm here having a great time. So what does it matter? She said that was so incredibly different. And she just moved on. It was, like I said, a shoulder shrug. And then she went on and she continued to have a great time. So can you imagine that the biggest trigger you have with someone really important in your life, that just was so much less, that it just wasn't such a big deal anymore? Yeah, it's pretty great when that happens. So another example, this is a client who, out of childhood trauma, was really triggered when people were being sort of superficially nice. This happened often with like grocery clerks, bank tellers, other shoppers in a store, and they were just being typically polite, what we in the US call Midwest nice. And that was a huge trigger for her. It felt threatening to her, actually, and she would very abruptly shut them down, almost to the point sometimes that they would be in tears. So I'm curious if you can relate to this. Is there something that maybe most people would consider objectively harmless, and maybe you would too, and yet no matter how harmless it is intellectually, it's a huge trigger for you? So if so, I'm so sorry. I really understand that that's coming for you from a great place of great anxiety and fear, and I know how incredibly hard that is. But let me tell you what happened with this client. She started to see a shift kind of everywhere across her life. She started to tell me about work colleagues who she'd told me about many times, and she'd say, "Oh yeah, like Susie and I were in the kitchenette and we were kind of bantering around, and she handed me something and she said, "Hey, maybe you'd like this." And I said, "Wait, Susie?" And I'm rifling back in my notes saying, the Susie that has been supremely irritating to you, that you could not stand, that you avoided at all costs because she was such a trigger, that Susie? And she said, "Yeah, that one. Yeah, I think she's kind of cute now. She just seems funny." And then she said, "Wow, that really is so different." And she was telling me about this day when she was out running errands with her teenage son, and she'd put a shopping cart back in the parking lot, and she was bantering with somebody in the parking lot. And then she came back to the car, and her son was looking at her like she had three heads. And he demanded to know, "Who are you? And what have you done with my mother?" And then she was really confused. She said, "What are you talking about? I don't know what you're talking about." And he said, "You don't banter with strangers like that." And she said, "Oh, you're right. I don't. Oh my gosh, that's so different." She didn't even realize how different it was. That is the kind of thing that happens from quanta change, because it's not just about deciding that you're going to change your behavior, control your feelings. It's that we make this underlying feeling change, and then your feelings and your behavior change automatically as a result of that, effortlessly. So, does this kind of change sound good? I want to say one more thing before I close up here, and that's to really recognize that nothing that I've said here is suggesting that that you should excuse or ignore other people's bad behavior. Sometimes other people's behavior warrants accountability, and everyone is also always responsible for their bad behavior. However, if you are seeing a pattern in how you are triggered by other people, that really points to it being your learned distress that's getting triggered, and that's what you can do something about. So if it sounds good, if it sounds like wow, getting rid of some of this underlying learned distress would make your life easier, would help you feel better on a day-to-day basis. So the first step in doing that is to find out which pattern of learned distress you have. So there are 6 overall patterns of learned distress. They are called the idealist, the perfectionist, the caregiver, the defeatist, the dictator or benevolent dictator, and the optimist. So the reason to find out your pattern of learned distress is not to just understand it better or figure out how you can control it better or just dive into your negative stuff more. No, it's to find out what learned distress quanta change is going to help you in peeling off so that you can feel better, so that you have less learned distress to be triggered, so that your life works better. So the way that you find out which pattern you have is to go to my website and take a free, in-depth, scientifically validated personality test. It measures learned distress, and I'm going to graph it for you and send you a free report that contains your pattern, the ways you've survived with that pattern of learned distress your whole life, and how quanta change really can help you peel off layers of learned distress and feel better. So to do that, you go to my website, Quanta Change, Quanta change.com, and click on the free report button. And I will put that link in my bio and in all the usual places. So I hope this has really been helpful for you today. And thank you so much for joining me. I hope that you will join me again next Friday to hear about another way in which quanta change really can help you feel good being you. Thank you.